Right, this is about how we are convinced in the majority that there is such a thing called man-made global warming from carbon dioxide emitted from burning fossil fuel and the like. Now, of course, this idea has been around 30 or 40 years, came from somebody called Svante Arrhenius in its modern form about 100 years ago, picked up by Al Gore and run with. But the thing is that the IPCC started in the early 90s. It produced all sorts of predictions and imaginations and guesses because it was all based on computer models and rather dubious observations from land-based measurement schemes and weather balloons and the like, which have been criticised for many years for various inadequacies, such as measuring the temperature around an airport where the planes and the urban heat islands in towns actually increase the heat unnaturally rather than naturally, but not through carbon dioxide. Now, the basic science is very simple. It's so simple that you or I or anybody can understand it. So all this nonsense that you need to be a scientist is absolute garbage, because the scientists need to be qualified to generate the information and to do the equations, but anybody who can understand very simple physics like O-level or whatever you learn at school is perfectly qualified to see their figures that they generate, because like a car, you need to be qualified to build it and repair it, but not to drive it or to watch your television. So anyone who tells you that you're not qualified to understand the climate is trying to con you. Anyhow, we'll begin with the science because we've had quite a long time to run the experiment, because the CO2 is very convenient in that if you go into space you have a temperature which is 33 degrees centigrade higher down here on the surface than it is outside the atmosphere. Now, there are various theories as to what causes that. The greenhouse effect is not the only one. There's also the theory that the pressure of the atmosphere itself causes it. Just like if you're pumping up your bicycle tyres, the tyre will always get hot, and so will the pump, because you are increasing the pressure in the air. And there's no CO2 or greenhouse. You're generating pressure from the movement. So, you know, this science is not exactly obvious, known or anything else, because I'm sitting, in fact, funny enough, as we talk, in a greenhouse. This is a conservatory. It's got a plastic clear roof, and in the summer indeed it will get very hot because the plastic roof will trap the heat. Now, if you take that plastic roof away and replace it with gas, what do you think will happen? The heat will go through the gas, because the gas is not stable, it's not in the same place, it moves constantly, and it doesn't absorb heat in the same places at the same time. So you're not comparing light with light, but they've treated it as if it is. So out of those 33 degrees centigrade, 1 degree is claimed to be from carbon dioxide. That's fair enough. Now, the IPCC have got their safe figure. What's the safe figure based on? Computer projections, not history, because temperatures have gone up more than this in history, and we know what happens. It's Roman periods, medieval periods. There was all sorts of huge agriculture in places like Greenland and the north of England, where they hadn't had it before, and red wine in the north of England, which wouldn't be possible without a certain minimum temperature to produce that red wine. So all these things have got perfectly good evidence in the past. We don't need to look ahead into these computer models. So anyway, the computer models said that a safe amount of heating would be 2 to 3 degrees. When did they say it? 2100. Now, I would be 140 years old then, and in 1990 or so when they did it, nobody living in 1990 would be around in 2100. So if you're running a scientific experiment, the first thing in science is observation. Now, observation is essential, and you can't observe what's going to happen in 2100, so where's the science in that? So they said that with CO2 rising, which in fact is the only thing which has happened, nothing else has happened. The CO2 has risen. Yes, it has. In fact, they measure it at Mauna Loa, which is next to a volcano in Hawaii, which produces CO2. You know, it could be relevant. might not be, but the point is that whatever they're measuring, all that's happened is we've got this 45-degree slope of CO2 rising consistently. Now, in fact, for 20 odd years we've had these policies to try and stop it. You know, where's the sense in that? But the only slight dip was in 2008 during the recession. Every other time it has been continuous, so the policies themselves are clearly not working because they haven't stopped the rise in CO2 one bit. And that's a separate issue I'll deal with a little bit later. So it's looking a bit shaky at the moment, I would say, because the temperature is now being measured constantly. And, you know, before this AGW, anthropogenic global warming, we are in the dock and we're found guilty without a trial or a jury. Nobody cared or noticed because it was always weather. It was hotter today, it was warmer last year, it was colder the year before. Who cares? You know, variations on a theme, we all get it, we all know about it. And if you look at the newspapers going back 100 or 200 years, they've been talking about melting glaciers and rising sea levels and all that nonsense because people are fascinated by it. But that's what weather does. Climate does it as well, but in longer periods. So the weather will be what we get from day to day and the climate will be what we get from year to year, but variations on a theme. So the whole experiment is based on CO2 rising and a response in temperature. 1% of the, 1 degree of centigrade is 260 parts per million of CO2. 520 parts per million is doubling it, and that would give a 2 centigrade rise, unless we have positive feedback. Now, positive feedback basically says that the heat causes the water in the oceans to rise, and water vapour is a powerful greenhouse gas according to them, whereas CO2 is a very weak greenhouse gas which becomes weaker the more you add because it uses up its spectrum and potential and eventually becomes saturated and can do no more. When does that happen? They don't know. They've admitted it. They haven't a clue. It could be any time at all. So that's scientific, isn't it? You know, it'll rise to 1,000 or 2,000 and it won't have done anything else, and it'll be no problem. We'd have spent billions trying to stop it. Yes, highly sensible. So the point is, we've got an experiment where CO2 in 2011 last year was at 390 parts per million, which is very useful because, you know, for people not good at maths like me, it allows us an exact 50% rise. And where has the temperature gone? Well, 1850 is their base, which is basically the Industrial Revolution, where it was 260 parts per million. 50% later at 2011, it is 390, and the temperature has gone up 0.8 degrees. Now that, to me, is 50% of an experiment run. So double 0.8, you get 1.6, which is slightly above the 1 degree, but then again, what is the weather or the temperature or the climate always doing? Coming out of an ice age or going into an ice age. It's never stable for long. It's always going up or going down. It's been going up for the last 22,000 years because we've been coming out of an ice age. And the sea level responds to that. So the sea level is a very good thermometer because you can measure that a lot easier. It's not perfect, but it's a lot easier than temperature because the temperature changes every second. You know, you just go outside and you'll find out. And every location, whereas the sea level does change, but the amount it changes is far less than the temperature. So it's a very good way of measuring. And you've got gauges which have been there for hundreds of years for the fishermen and the people going out on cruises and liners and everything. So, you know, the sea level has always had to be measured far better by the Coast Guard Service than the temperatures, because the temperatures don't really matter and there's not a lot we can do about them. We just, you know, put on another jumper or go out with an umbrella if it's going to rain. The sea levels have always been important because you can be killed if you go out in the wrong sea conditions. So the sea has not really been doing its thing. It has not been giving up its water by evaporating, because if you get a puddle after the rain, it will evaporate evenly. Of course it will. That's what, you know, my basic O-level physics tells me. Newton's laws, go back to basics, you can understand anything. Newton's laws say that water will evaporate evenly. So this thing about the water, there was no built-in feedback saying that, oh, it's going to be a delay. No delay at all. It was going to go evenly up and cause unknown amounts of increase. So it hasn't happened. The experiment is 50% run, hasn't happened. So the point is here, what this little talk is about, it's not so much the science, because thousands of people can deal with that better than me, but the potential for fraud, the potential to con people, the potential to take nothing and make something out of it, just like Bernie Madoff did, just like Enron did. And by no coincidence, Enron are actually behind all the climate policies we have today, which I'll explain soon. So the big question is, while we have temperatures which are below the IPCC's lowest estimate in the early 90s for no increase in CO2 at all by 2011, why haven't we heard about it? Why have one or two newspapers reported it and nobody else? And in fact, last week in The Guardian, thank goodness, because they are pretty much the mouthpiece of the IPCC in Britain, the independent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, who are the beginning of one world government. And the interesting thing is that the report said that the glaciers, the biggest chain in the world going from the Himalayas to China, the great long mountain range, the biggest we've got, the glaciers have not changed in 10 years. Neither has the temperature, of course, we knew that. So that in itself, you know, again, members of the jury, no qualifications at all, but you can decide if somebody's going to live or die in some countries. What would you say to that? Reasonable doubt? Quite possibly. But the interesting thing, the really vitally interesting thing, is that they said that the scientists have been saying that 50 billion gallons, I think it was, of water had been coming off these things every year and not being replaced, and they've just found they were wrong. Now, where's the consensus there? That's a real consensus. That is a consensus which tells you that you have the scientists, not a single one of them was quoted as disagreeing. They had agreed. Now, where did they get this sum from? Because they were wrong. They have been proved, every single one of them couldn't measure the glaciers until now. Now, what's that say about everything else they've done? So that in itself is the most important event, probably, since the IPCC existed, because it's proved that these scientists can get it wrong, and when they get it wrong, boy do they get it wrong. But then, apart from The Guardian, who reported it, and then how many governments took any notice? None whatsoever. So we have a conspiracy. Now, the great thing about conspiracies is that a conspiracy theory is just that, but a conspiracy is a legal term, which means a legal agreement to break the law, to defraud people, to commit a crime. Now, obviously there wouldn't be a law of conspiracy if it wasn't possible. So clearly it is possible, it does happen, and in these cases it hasn't just happened, but they're now admitting it, which again I'll deal with later, because I'm trying to do this in an order. So I'm raising up the points so that you can see them later. So the conspiracy is that with growing real data, because obviously you can't fix the data that much, because the Coast Guards and the universities have been turning this stuff out since before the 90s, so it's independent. You've got to know where to get your data from. If it's coming from somewhere who is not told what to do because they're doing it to save lives, to stop people getting drowned at sea, then they're not going to fiddle their data because they're being relied upon. Neither are Piers Corbyn of Weather Action, who didn't quite teach me all I know, but an awful lot that I know. He is paid by his results. He's not working for anyone except Piers Corbyn, so if he gets it wrong, he loses business. So I will thank him here, because he is one of my teachers and deserves to be quoted. Anyway, the great thing is that we have public relations companies involved. Now, public relations is normally employed by somebody who is either, as Max Clifford would say, as the British guru of public relations, to publicise something, or as he says in the majority of cases, to hide something. Now, most people think of PR as something designed to promote, but this is not the case. Max Clifford did an interview and said, no, it's not to promote. Most of my work is keeping people out of trouble, keeping them out of the public eye when they have done a boo-boo, and they will look bad and they will wreck their career. Now, the University of Queensland have invested, I'm not sure if this is every year or altogether, I'd say it's probably an ongoing thing because it's a permanent setup, 640,000 Australian dollars into a firm called Skeptical Science, who are paid full time to take every single study in global warming which doesn't agree with the consensus and get their scientists to undo it. So they've got a team going maybe 4 or 5 reports a day online why this latest figure is rubbish. Now, I don't think I can think of anything since the flat earthers and then the people who said that the sun went round the earth, who have spent any time at all using a PR company to promote a scientific theory. It should stand on its own, shouldn't it? So why are they doing it? And why does MoveOn.org and the environmental PR companies, totaling 4, run by George Soros, spend lots and lots of money promoting something which should speak for itself? Why would that be? Well, I'll explain why in a moment. I have to have notes here because this is a very complicated issue. Now, the appeal to authority will usually work as well because, you know, why do you question a scientist? Well, I've just given various reasons. I mean, stomach ulcers were a marvellous example that for all my life until a few years ago people thought it was due to stress and stomach acid and goodness knows what. And one person, not a consensus. It's, you know, genius comes in single figures, whereas stupidity comes in huge figures like the masses. You've got a pyramid where only the people at the top really know what's going on. Professionals are very good at what they do, but only geniuses can see how somebody else's profession fits in and how the big picture fits in altogether. Anyway, this doctor had to test his theory on himself. He swallowed Helicobacter, I think it was, and made himself very ill and proved it caused stomach ulcers, and now we know that they use antibiotics, but the consensus was wrong, just like it was over the glaciers, so they can't use that one, and the judge would not like it one bit and throw it away and tell the jury to disregard it. Now, my background isn't in science, but it is in law, it is in psychology, because not many people, few, but not many people study law and then psychology, and I have, and criminology as part of my law degree. So it's a very useful combination, because I was always interested in people. I was also interested in a career which might actually pay me something, so I did law rather than some of these other humanities, because I thought I might actually get a decent job at the end of it, but I went back to my first love and did psychology postgraduate. So that's my background, in case anybody's watching this and says, you know, what the hell's he got to know to talk about this. So the appeal to authority, you know, trust me, I'm a doctor. Well, I'll just put 2 fingers up at that one. So we will now look at the public relations in great detail. Now, we've got the peer review process, which is part of the appeal to authority, but when you really look at it, it's more like you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I mean, I won't go into the details of it here because it's incredibly dull, but basically it's the little thing that, you know, you can't mark your own paper, so you get somebody else to do it, but when it's an exam, it's pretty well anonymous and nobody knows who's marking what, and they don't care about the results except that they're correct and that they're not getting it wrong, not that the right people get the right results. But with peer review you can really pretty much get your friends to do it and block other people, so anything sceptical they can put the mockers on anybody getting peer reviewed, and until it's peer reviewed nobody will look at it or publish it. I mean, take my word for it, it's very easy to screw up the peer review process, and in the end it's meaningless because the figures speak for themselves with something like the climate. Now, the psychology is basically the propaganda, the public relations. Now, the Nazis thought of it, it was their idea, and Goebbels was the one who basically invented it. and the Soviets has taken it up since then, and it's now part of what we would call an acceptable Western system used to increase the revenue of large companies. But they use it everywhere. They use it in politics far more than anything else. And I will just quote some of the things from Goebbels and others. The rank and file are usually much more primitive than we imagine. Propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. Now they use catchphrases, wonderful catchphrases. And it's also about dividing and ruling. You have an enemy, in this case the polluters. The fact that everybody in the civilised world is a polluter is another story, and of course what is pollution? Something you want to get rid of. What's the enemy? CO2. How do you want to get rid of CO2? Well, you know, we'd all be dead without it. And at what point does it become a pollutant? No one knows, because it's not because of pollutant, it's something that shouldn't be there in the first place. So propaganda must label events and people with distinctive phrases or slogans. They must evoke desired responses which the audience previously possesses. So take old words and make them do other things. They must be capable of being easily learned. They must be utilised again and again, but only in appropriate situations. So low carbon, carbon neutral, pollution, sustainability, denier, carbon footprint, clean energy, dirty energy, green jobs, and carbon footprint mean nothing at all. This is what magicians, hypnotists and anyone else who is trying to fool people uses. But the difference is magicians and hypnotists are trying to entertain or help you. These people are not trying to entertain or help you. They are using a neutral power in order to do something bad and to fool you, which is not nice. And this is my purpose, is to show everybody which is watching this, tell your friends, because we all need to know this, that you can be conned. Now, post-normal science is the modern version of PR. Self-evidently, dangerous climate change will not emerge from a normal scientific process of truth-seeking. Scientists and politicians must trade truth through influence. What matters about climate change is not whether we can predict the future with some desired level of certainty and accuracy. What they're basically saying is that it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. The cause is greater than the actual details. Post-normal science, it was created by somebody. Don't worry about the name. We're not doing an exam. But it's appropriate for cases where the facts are uncertain, values in dispute, stakes high and decisions urgent. That was Funterwits and Rabbits in 1991. But Mike Hume was the one who did the interview with The Guardian and basically admitted to it. Nobody minded, nobody cared. Keep the lively, keep it simple, keep saying it, eventually they'll believe it. That was supposed to be coming from Hitler, but may or may not have done, but it's pretty well what they do. Propaganda must label events and people with distinctive phrases or slogans. They must evoke desired responses. I've said that. So I was just doing a bit of propaganda there myself by repeating something, and the more you say it, of course, it becomes natural, and you say it without thinking. So divide and rule. Now cults show every one of the same scenarios as global warming because they divide and rule there. You split people up from their families, so a cult will put people against the members of their family. Now teaching Al Gore's inconvenient truth in schools, what does it do? It gets the children to complain about their parents' carbon footprint, and they should be turning off the lights and turning down the heating and not flying on holiday. And they'll grow up, believe me, hating their parents in the future and becoming thoroughly neurotic. Thank you, Al Gore. Now, here are a few little quotes. Unless we announce disasters, no one will listen. We have to offer up scary scenarios. Dr. Stephen Schneider, one of the greatest people in charge of this PR campaign, who's no longer with us, but left his mark. Now, no supercomputer, however powerful, is able to prove definitively a simple hypothesis that says the greenhouse effect is responsible for warming. The models are tuned to assume a high climate sensitivity, so high climate sensitivity is what they find. Shunichi Akasofu. in climate research and modelling, we should recognise that we're dealing with a coupled non-linear chaotic system, and therefore that the long-term prediction of future climate states is not possible. Now, I said that right at the beginning about the greenhouse, but who said that quote? The IPCC themselves in 2001. Now, the IPCC are in charge of this, yet the governments and the media take no notice. And in 2007, I think it was, they came back with yet another one. Climate has always varied on all timescales, so the observed changes may be natural. So there you go. Reasonable doubt. It's in there from the beginning. They put it in themselves. So these are the psychological methods that they use. And they are methods which are very successful because enough people, I think they say 10% of people, have to realise something is wrong before it will fall apart. And the media don't allow them to see it, because these figures, the actual data, are nowhere near what they say. Now, the polar bears are a marvellous example. In a recent court case, they were trying to stop yet another oil drilling or something in Canada, so their equivalent of Greenpeace went to court and said, oh, well, you know, we want you to stop this for the environment, which happens every few weeks somewhere in the world. And I read the court report, and it says that even though the polar bear population is currently healthy, and I thought, hang on a minute, what did he just say? Even though the polar bear population is currently healthy. Now, this man was one of the activists under oath, and he had just admitted that the polar bear population is healthy. Well, of course it's healthy. What's a polar bear? Now, what's an ermine? An ermine is a stoat in the winter because it goes white to blend in with the snow. Polar bears are black bears who became white in the winter because they moved north, because bears are incredibly versatile and can live just about anywhere. So they moved north, and because it's always white in the north, they didn't become black again. But they don't need the ice. Believe me, they can swim 300 miles, and they're colonising all sorts of places in Canada at the moment without an awful lot of ice, and raiding the bins just like urban foxes. And polar bears couldn't care less whether it's cold or warm or wet or icy or frozen or not. They are bears, and they're just as many now as there always were. So that's one of their little PR campaigns. Down the toilet, is it in the news? No. You have to have collusion. You have to have the BBC, you have to have the IPCC, you have to have the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, and all the world, the NOAA, NASA in America, all working together. Now, the sceptics have been making claims that there are doubts for many years, and then ClimateGate 2 years ago, 2009, found that the scientists themselves share these doubts, and they will go to all sorts of lengths to fix them. And there were three little inquiries, and the main inquiry was Lord Oxborough, who was in charge of it. Now, since then, ClimateGate 2 has come out with far more data and actual long conversations between named people discussing how to hide the data which is missing or wrong or doesn't fit their models, etc., etc. I'll give a few quotes, but it's all over the internet, you can read it anywhere. But the interesting thing is who they got to head this inquiry was Lord Oxborough. Lord Oxborough has paid directorships of 2 renewable energy companies and is a paid advisor to Climate Change Capital, the Low Carbon Initiative, Evo Electric, Fujitsu, and an environmental advisor to Deutsche Bank. Last month we revealed that Oxborough had failed to declare its directorship of Globe International, an international network of legislators with ties to the Club of Rome, who in fact appear to have published their own admission that they created global warming to create a world government, because problem, reaction and solution. If you have a situation that you want to bring about, such as a world currency, then what you will do is you will create a crisis in the currency, so the only solution is a world currency. And if you want a world tax, you think of a reason: carbon emissions, world carbon tax is the only way to do it, etc., etc. So something that people would never want otherwise, suddenly they want it. Oh, we must have a world carbon tax. Oh dear, we are buggered. Anyway, Lord Oxborough, under the rule of the possibility of bias under British law, was not qualified to listen to this, and he's actually been mentioned in ClimateGate 2 as part of the team. So he's a naughty boy, because he found that they'd done nothing wrong at all, certainly nothing that they could be punished for, and under British law, if it was taken to court, it would be void ab initio. The decision never existed because he wasn't qualified to do it, because not he was biased, but he was possible that he might have been biased. The BBC, of course, invests in climate change. They have pensions in the Climate Change Fund, and Peter Dunscombe is one of their directors, and the Climate Change Fund, which only makes money from climate change, you know, it's meant to be something scientific, but it makes money from it. He is running this investment company as well. So, of course, the BBC reports the 2007 briefing that the science is settled and the BBC should no longer push the other side was for a very good reason. So, and all this stuff about the oil companies. Now let me tell you about the oil companies. Anyone who's done basic economics knows about supply and demand. The oil companies have funded huge amounts of research into climate change and huge organisations to promote it, and not, as you would think, to be sceptical. Why is this? Because climate change policies restrict energy usage. What happens if you restrict a commodity? The price goes up. They are sitting on a limited amount of oil and gas and everything else, and if you put the price up, they will get more for the same amount. So it doesn't bother them in the slightest, and they are not oil companies. There's no such thing as big oil. They are energy companies. An energy company will make a profit from energy. So if it's profitable because of subsidies to put wind farms and biofuels and everything else that make people starve in the third world because their food crops are being ripped up to put in biofuel, then so be it. It's nothing to do with green energy or anything else. It's to do with profit. So the BBC are pretty well, you know, the British spokespeople for the IPCC, and they've got very good reason to do so. Now, carbon trading is interesting because I'm fascinated by fraud anyway. That's, you know, I like to break apart all this nonsense and see through it and then show other people how to do it. And I've written another article, which I will do another lecture on at some time, how to do that. But when I read about carbon credits, I thought, well, I read about Enron years ago. It's very similar, isn't it? Turns out that before Enron went broke and got prosecuted for one of the biggest frauds in the 20th century, they met Al Gore and President Clinton in the White House, in the Oval Office, and Ken Lay explained about how they worked. And Al Gore said, this is a marvellous idea, I must impose this on America. And what he did, he set up carbon trading, didn't get in as president, so from a millionaire Al Gore, set up a carbon trading company, sold his carbon credits to countries worldwide, like the EU, who have set it up in every one of their member states, and guess what? He owned the carbon trading company and became a billionaire as a result. Any possibility for bias there? I would say so. I think it's fairly safe to do that. So, you know, can you see a picture forming here that Al Gore was at university doing a non-science subject, but because of the American system they do a bit of everything. Roger Revelle was his lecturer, who at the time mentioned about the carbon forcing, as they call it. You know, the carbon dioxide forces the temperature to go up. Now, conservation of energy tells you can't get something from nothing. Where is that energy coming from? I'd like to know. I want to fill my house with CO2 because it'll save my heating bills. It's a lot cheaper than gas. Anyway, that's another story. He liked this idea and ran with it, and Roger Revelle did something which quite a few of these guys are doing now. They're retiring. What happens when they retire? There's this miraculous coincidence that when scientists retire, they change their views. It's odd, isn't it, that Roger Revelle said, oh, I don't think this global warming works. I think I made a mistake, just like Margaret Thatcher did. Now, Margaret Thatcher might have been a great politician, but she was a chemist. She was a qualified scientist. She developed this sort of policy in its infancy while she was Prime Minister, and then afterwards realised the error of her ways, and it was too late. But What did Al Gore say? Oh, he's senile now, don't take any notice of what he said, of course it's real. Now, who was the scientist and lecturer, and who was Al Gore? Why do people listen to Al Gore? He is not a scientist, and he has something to gain. I've got nothing to gain here, I'm just telling it how it is. So, anyway, these carbon credits were what got Enron done for creating false profits, false imitation money, basically. They were doing quantitative easing in their own methods of printing carbon credits as their own form of money. And it's now legal, even though it was fraud then, because they've now said it's legal. Marvellous. So, let me see about the... we've done the financial, we've done psychological, political. Yeah, here we go for our conspiracy. It's not conspiracy theory, because the difference here with the conspiracy theories and the conspiracies is that they've actually admitted to it. All of this is published. It's either been done in interviews, in which case the interviews have been recorded and you can hear them online. They're all online. In fact, the great thing about the internet is that previously I would have had to go to the library and ask the nice lady in archives to go and turn the wheel which opens the archives, because they're all locked up to save space, and pull out these files for me. I used to be a great visitor to the local archives in Barnet, and now it's all on the internet, so I just go click, 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 and the Club of Rome reports pop up, because the thing about the Club of Rome is they are so powerful that they are the top of the food chain. Being the top of the food chain, you do not need to actually do anything legal, because there's nobody above you. So anybody who's at the top of the food chain can do whatever they like, because there's nobody left to prosecute them. So, you know, when we talk about the ultimate wrongdoing, where murder is got away with, figuratively and literally, and you say, well, why isn't anyone doing anything about it? Well, who can do anything about it? They can't prosecute themselves. So we have Globe International, who are one of two groups, one which I only found out about recently, and I only found one reference to. It's called the Club of the Isles. It is probably the closest you get to what you call the elite or the Illuminati, because it's made up of Prince Philip and various members of royal families worldwide. They are ruling the Club of Rome, who are beneath them, working together. And then the Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, all the usual suspects. But the Club of the Isles are very important here, because they developed the World Wildlife Fund. That's why Prince Philip was the patron of it, because it was his idea. United Nations 1992 Agenda 21 it's about sustainability. It's basically a good idea in theory. Club of Rome also wrote about this in theory. Damn good idea, because they are saying that the Earth can only sustain 1 to 2 billion people, and now we're up to 7 billion. What do we do about it? The difference is about means rather than ends. The ends are pretty sensible. If we had what we call natural wastage, so you don't sack people, but you wait till they retire, very sensible. Keep the population down, reduce the staff, but we're not talking about the deer in Richmond Park where they kill them every year to keep the population down. We're talking about educating the third world. Do not have 8 children, you know, use contraception, keep the population down, because you haven't got room, we haven't got room, and we haven't got enough resources to support you. But it's about depopulation up to a point. That's one of the motivating factors. Money is the motivating factor elsewhere. Money, power, depopulation, depends where you're coming from, but they all have the same ends. They're all working together. So what we've got is we've got the Club of Rome, 1991, published the first global revolution based on this thing, which is Agenda 21, which is all online, word for word. You can read them all, and so is this. The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it's only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself. This was restated in 1996 by Mikhail Gorbachev, who said the threat of environmental crisis will be the international disaster key that will unlock the new world order. So, you know, nobody has actually said that this is a conspiracy. It's published, it's official, but the conspiracy is the fact that the media no doubt know about all of this, but they don't report it. And in Ottmar Edenhofer's 2010 November interview, he's the IPCC's lead economist, and he said in an interview just before the latest Green Summit in Cancun, one must clearly say that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that the international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. Basically, it's a big mistake to discuss climate policy separate from the major themes of globalisation. The Climate Summit at Cancun at the end of the month is not a climate conference, one of the largest economic conferences since the Second World War. Now, this was interviewed by a German, you know, no coincidence because he's German, and it never got past the interview. Nobody ever reported it, because the internet, again, your searches, your Googles will tell you your stats, your views. So if you put in a piece of news, the Club of the Isles raises one website from 1998, thank goodness it did, because it fit into the pyramid perfectly of power there at the top, Club Aroma beneath them, etc, etc. And below that you have got your IPCC, who are dealing with these people all the time, carrying out their wishes, and you've got world carbon tax, which was leaked again amazingly by The Guardian. The world carbon tax is all about having the UN saying that, well, obviously each country is going to disagree on taxation, so we've got to have a world tax. Now, who can do that? The UN. And to have a world tax, you have to have a world currency and a world government, because you can't do one without the other. The world carbon currency is very useful because it gets rid of wealth. Because if I put money in the bank, it's mine forever. But what's the difference with world carbon currency, which is basically a form of rationing? It only lasts for a year. So your carbon credits will last for a year in the form of carbon currency and then fizzle out, and you've got to start again. So it's starting off with companies, but we'll all have to do it if they get their way. It's all available online. You can read it all. It's not a secret. So, no ifs, buts or maybes. They have admitted it. Nobody's reported it. And you've got to look, follow the thing. You've got the organisations telling the government what to do. They create it with taxes, subsidies. The energy companies make an absolute fortune from it because it puts up their profits. The city traders make a fortune because, again, they're trading in fresh air. It's a lot easier to trade in something that doesn't exist than something which does exist, because it's infinite and endless and the people think it's real. They don't own it, you can't deliver it, but they're still doing it. The investors invest in it just like Bernie Madoff, where all you're doing is moving the same money around. And it can't go on forever because it's a pyramid scheme, but what they're doing is they're taking our money in the form of energy taxes to keep it going, to pay for them. And the universities and the charities are making a fortune. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds slipped this out. If I hadn't been in the car, I would have written it down on the programme and tried to record it, but I memorised it word for word, that we have to mention the climate in many of our studies, because otherwise we wouldn't get the grants, and this is quite common across the charities as a whole. Now, the point is that lying in order to make money for a good cause, is that a good thing or not? You know, that is what we call moral relativism. Does the means justify the end? So if you lie, I mean, there is only so much grant money. All this money could have been spent on cleaning up the swamps and getting rid of malaria and stopping the raw sewage going in the sea around Africa. That could have been done by now, the money spent on the climate, but it hasn't been. So you've got an opportunity cost, because the real money, there is only so much real money, and if it's not spent on one thing, it's spent on another, so it's been taken away from genuine good causes and real pollution to go on all this climate nonsense. So all these grants are going to the universities, and you look at it as a big spider's web, a big network, and you've got all the money and the power going round and round, being taken from the ordinary people as taxes, given back in subsidies to the universities, and the government giving grants for renewable energy and green jobs, which is basically what they used to have in Russia when they had unemployment. They'd invent jobs just to make people come off the unemployment and give them money, when they're basically just giving them benefits for doing nothing. So here we go, the mafia are in charge, and it does actually say now in Italy, just as an aside, that the largest industry in Italy, now how they get these figures proves they must know what they're doing. 7% of the gross national product in Italy is held by the mafia in 2011. So they have set the example. And here's a piece about the mafia running carbon trading. On the Italian island of Sicily, one recently defected mafia boss revealed just how some of this money was channeled into mafia hands. Not wanting to be seen speaking to the BBC in public, this could be from a film, couldn't it? Antonio Birritella agreed to a meeting in a private room at a backstreet hotel in the island's capital, Palermo. All of these are funds from the EU were seen as a gift to the mafia. Easy pickings, especially the development of wind farms and renewable energy. I don't do an Italian accent, but I had to try there because keeping it in with a sort of film theme, I thought I would do a bit of bad acting there. So the point is that the mafia are teaching these people how to do their job, really, because if you think of the government as the mafia, you know, they're not here to help us, they're here to help themselves, and if you play the game and pay the money, they won't burn your house down. It's as simple as that. So we've got a few leaders at the top who know exactly what's going on. You've got all the scientists underneath who some of them believe it, and the politicians, some of whom believe it. And then you've got the poor, useful idiots at the bottom. You get these twits who are standing outside parliaments worldwide asking for higher taxes. Now, could you really get people to vote for higher taxes? Would you vote for higher taxes for any other reason except abject fear? Because the point is that the fear based on not just you but your children. Al Gore says the reason it's 2100 is because it's not for you but for your grandchildren that you're protecting. Now, this primal fear of protecting your family, it's in the Bible. Jesus says you must hate your family. He doesn't mean you must hate your family altogether. What he's saying is that you've got to love everyone and not treat your family any better. You've got to go against that thing where you look after yourself and sod everyone else because you're on the inside pissing outside, as they say. And that is not good because your family are dry, but everyone else is covered in piss. So you have to change this attitude, and you can't because it's built in the genes. You know, the animal will protect their cubs at all rates. And if you scare people, their children or their unborn grandchildren who don't exist and may never exist will be hurt. Logic goes out the window. The first thing we learnt in psychology, why people who are educated and sensible treat their children like idiots is because they're scared of the children getting hurt, so their logic goes out the window. They become emotional. Your emotions are much stronger than your mind, so when faced with the data, all the data now is pretty well in. I mean, every week we get new measurements saying that the figures that the IPC were quoting were about 90% higher than what they are now. Everything is within normal boundaries, and that the things which are not in normal boundaries, you can see where they've adjusted them and put this 45-degree slope. Every time I've got pages of sea level and temperature from round the world where you've got the original data, which is sort of random, and then it goes like that. How does it go like that? You know, from like that to like that. Because they put these little twists in them, these equations in them. They are naughty. They are very naughty, and they get away with it. If you did that as an accountant or a company director, you'd be in prison. If you do it if you're a scientist, you get a Nobel Prize. No, that is not how to run the things. Now, I will just let them speak for themselves. Now, you know, nothing better than eavesdropping, because, you know, being a fly on the wall, you can hear a lot more in 10 minutes than you can in a year from reading the newspapers. Climate Gate 2. Observations do not show rising temperatures throughout the tropical troposphere unless you accept one single study and approach and discount a wealth of others. This is just downright dangerous. We need to communicate the uncertainty and be honest. Phil, Jones that is. Hopefully we can find time to discuss these further as necessary. Now these are the doubts inside, because they are saying what we've said all the time. Mistakes, lack of truth, leaks. If your foundation is not on truth, it just evaporates, it turns to dust because there's nothing underneath it. Eventually, however much you try and hide it, however much you try and cover it up, it has to come out because that is its nature. There's nothing behind it, and they know that. Next one. I also think the science is being manipulated to put a political spin on it, which for all our sakes might not be too clever in the long run. They're not stupid. The thing is, they're getting paid for doing this. Nobody's prosecuting them. Nobody's taking them to court. It's not their backsides. Once they've retired, they'll get their pension. They are earning so much more than they would have done without global warming. All these scientists would be they wouldn't have a job, because it used to be meteorologists doing weather forecasts, and a tiny little group of scientists became climate scientists in the 1970s, where the Climate Research Unit was developed the first time in the University of East Anglia. They were the first climatologists. Before that, it wasn't even a science. And if you look at all the books, the medieval warm period, sort of, whoop, up like that, grapes in England, no ice in Greenland, etc., etc. And bottom line, IPCC report, not mine or anyone else's, more people die in cold weather than warm weather. And the warmer it gets up to what you would call a reasonable level, probably 4 or 5 degrees above what it is now, which we'll never get to for God knows how long, especially as it's falling at the moment. We won't worry about that. The point is that the ice will always kill more people than the warmth. All that happens is that your temperate zones go a little bit north and the deserts go a little bit north, so all that huge expanse of ice to the north becomes livable. But the funny thing is, of course, people are living in the ice and the deserts already. So as for the sea level, it's gone down more in the last 2 years than it went up in the last 3 years, and that all the sea level has ever gone up is about 8 inches in a century. Now, it would take thousands of years for the Maldives to go anywhere else, and the fact that people build on floodplains and Pakistan is below sea level already, well, yeah, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all those areas, is their own blooming fault for what the Club of Rome and others quite genuinely say is overpopulation. Because if it wasn't for overpopulation, people wouldn't have to live on floodplains and in stupid places where they should never have lived in the first place, because there would be room for them to live in the decent places. But you don't get rid of them through making your energy prices so high that the pensioners die, or starving them through putting in biofuel. Anyway, I hope that this has been informative. I have pages of links here to various things. Let's see if there are any that I can just mention quickly. I'll go through just to say what we've got. Ice core unreliability. 3 examples of changing data from flat to angled. James Hansen's diagram of the hottest year ever, which is then torn apart by Stephen Goddard. Penn Haddo's ice survey, where they drilled into the ice cores in the Arctic, because what's happening is that you can't actually tell what the full ice thing is from the satellites, because they can't really get the thickness. So he went to drill and find out how thick it was, and the stuff broke as soon as he put it in. So that was a waste of time. Review of peer review. Interview with Mike Hume explaining about post-normal science. Many quotes. The BBC Pension Fund, History of Carbon Trading, Club of Rome, Gorbachev, the global carbon tax. Yes, don't forget the global carbon tax, because you need to have a global government for global carbon tax, so you have to have one before you can have the other. Ottmar Edenhofer, our great friend, who admitted it all and nobody reported it. I'm summarising here to remind you, you don't get anything in your mind better than repeating it, so I'm nicely summing it up. Quote from the Mafia, measurement of temperature changes, and we're pretty well covered. So what I've done here is I have divided something into the science, which was not as science says it should be, because it was not impartial, it was not objective, and it ignored the new observation and did not adapt to new information, as it should do. Then the psychology, the way that PR is used to make people believe anything they want it to, by selecting the right information and holding back the right information that would tell you the truth. And many examples where it's been slipped in through either interviews where they've admitted the truth and then, whoops, what have I said too late, or of course stuff has been hacked, which is even better because they'll say you're a fly on the wall and you actually hear it. So those are the psychological PR methods. The financial methods of carbon trading and carbon offsets, which are very good, because if you do a carbon offset, giving a bit of money on your plane ticket to pay for the CO2, do you know where it goes? No, neither do I. It goes to the carbon offset company. There's no legal requirement for them to do anything with it except take the money. Now, how would you make a law like that? The carbon offset is supposed to go somewhere to replace what it has taken away, whether you believe it or not. So why is the law not regulating them and just allowing the carbon offset companies to take them and keep the money? They don't have to tell you where it's going or do anything with it. Something wrong there, surely. Climate has always varied on all time scales, so the observed changes may be natural. Now, the IPCC have come up with all these caveats in every report, plus there are pages in the 2007 report of possible benefits of global warming, which I've said for years are blindingly obvious, and they're all ignored by governments worldwide. Why would that be? Two sides to the argument, only one of them is given. Not good. So we've got the financial, the political, where everyone scratches each other's backs, holds together, looks after each other, and the political is ideology based. So you get views from the Club of the Isles, Club of Rome. Useless eaters is what they call ordinary non-aristocratic humans, and they want to get rid of us basically. We're just there as slaves to do what they want, and when they're bored us and fed up with us, they'll try and get rid of us. But they can't do it too obviously, of course, so they have to do it in subtle ways, which I'm making less subtle by telling you how they do it. Because one thing about a magician is that once you've seen them without the mirrors and without the cloth in front of them, and you remove all the covers, see what they're doing, it's no longer a trick. You know what they're doing, they can't con you or fool you anymore. And this is not for entertainment, this is for our very survival, because how will you survive if you can't pay your gas bill? Well, you have to pay for food and not pay for your gas bill, or pay for your gas bill and starve. We don't want choices like this, and we don't want to be told when we can drive and where we can drive in the common market, or the EU, or whatever they call themselves, having plans to ban cars from city centres by 2020. We'd like to live our short time on earth with a little bit of freedom. And these clowns telling us when and where we can drive and how much our petrol's going to be because of the effect on the environment, when we can measure the effect on the environment, and what they're telling us just does not add up. Well, hopefully now you understand a lot more about how this is working and how easy it is to tell people just about anything, and they will believe it until they are told otherwise. Now, if I was the BBC and this was being shown on the BBC and I was a scientist, no doubt you would believe me, but don't fall for that authority. As I say, that's the only reason I even bothered to mention my qualifications, because as far as I'm concerned, the message should stand up for itself. You can check all of this yourselves. All this data is readily available online and elsewhere. If I could give you the links, I would, but it would take too long verbally. It's all written down. I'll put it all on the internet. Understandingfraud.blogspot.com. You can read it all there, everything I've told you and a lot more. Understandingfraud.blogspot.com. So let's hope that this gets spread. Everyone needs to know it, because each person will hear this, and one by one they'll say, my God, they've got me. Each person will have been caught like the fish with a different bait, a worm or a bit of chocolate or a bit of cheese. They'll have seen that thing, bitten it, they'll get that hook in their mouth, they say, my God, they've got me in that way, I don't like it, I'm going to free myself, I'm going to take that hook out, spit out that bait and say it's not real, I don't want to know. And every individual, because individual dialogue is the first and best way of sorting these problems out, until there aren't enough people left to believe it. All the politicians get voted out, We bring in people that don't believe in it. There are politicians who don't believe in it, but nobody will vote for them because they do believe in it. So there is a wee bit of democracy possible here. If we know the truth and we understand how they do it, they won't be able to pull the wool over our eyes any longer. I hope you've enjoyed this and I hope you believe it as well. Goodbye.